Thanks for staying up later. The director, Robert Altman, is with us tonight, the man who made MASH and Nashville, McCabe and Mrs. Miller on cable TV, Tanner 88. There are dozens more that we could talk about, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. But first of all, let's talk about your newest project, which is to be released soon, Vincent and Theo, about the life of Vincent Van Gogh.
Well, it's about, the story is the relationship of these two brothers, which I feel are like the Corsican brothers. I mean, one of them got sick and the other one would throw up. I mean, they were just so closely connected, and most people aren't familiar with that story. But, and then I try to deal with the process of painting and the pain. And, you know, this poor guy, the both of them, never had any inkling of any success ever in their lifetime.
Did you find Vincent Van Gogh to be, all things considered, a sympathetic character?
Well, I think he's a sympathetic character because of this incredible passion that he had. I don't think he was a very likable man. I don't think that he didn't have very many friends. He didn't keep them very long if he did. But this thing with he and his brother was just so strong. And when Vincent died, killed himself, his brother died 6 weeks. Just.
And had not previously been
ailing?
Yeah,
he was sick, and he was probably crazier. If Vincent was crazy, then Theo really was. But he was...
Was Theo an unfulfilled creative personality?
No.
Was he living through Vincent?
No, he was an art dealer. He worked... his uncle owned Goupel's, which was like Christie's. I mean, it was the big gallery. He worked there, and then he got his own gallery in Montmartre, and he was really a champion of the Impressionists, Monet and Cézanne, and he really started with that movement in the late 19th century, but he was always, and he pushed his brother's work.
He tried to sell the paintings, he tried to promote his career.
He sent him his lunch money is what he did, and his paint money, and he just, because he never worked. And Theo kept him, sent him his allowance. And nobody's sure, I think that the family actually filtered money through him, because they were a very wealthy family, and a very prominent Dutch family, and they cut him off because he was kind of like a beatnik. I mean, he wouldn't comb his hair, and he wouldn't wear a tie, and he wouldn't go to dinner if they had tablecloths, and he spoke in a very street kind of, he was a beatnik. And, but I think that when it came down to it, they weren't going to let him starve, and I think that the money was filtered through Theo.
What was the most surprising thing you learned about Van Gogh?
The most surprising thing I learned about Van Gogh is that the first child of that family was born in March 30th, 1851, I think, and he died, and he was named Vincent, and he died at birth, within a day or two of his birth. And the second child was born 1 year later to the day, on the same birth, had the same birthday, and he was named Vincent, and that's the painter that we know. And I think that somehow that shadow really affected him. And I think when his brother, and then he had a couple of sisters, then when Theo was born, he literally took Theo and just said, we have to make up for him. And not only did this death, or this birth-death occur, his father was a preacher, and the gravestone was right in their front yard where they lived. So he grew up with them taking flowers to the grave of this other Vincent. And I think that could be kind of a load on somebody.
Michael Murphy was here a few months ago, and among other things, he told me that many of the people, including some of the key people, connected with MASH were convinced in the middle of this movie that A, it would bomb, and B, they weren't so sure you knew what you were doing.
Well, both of those things are true. They were quite sure it was going to bomb. It was headed for the drive-ins. And I didn't know about this at the time, but Donald Sutherland and Elliott Gould, about halfway through the film, went to the studio and tried to get me fired. And I think had I known that, they said I was ruining their careers. And had I known that, I probably would have cried and gone home and not finished it. But I didn't know that, so I blithely went ahead. And
did you have, at the beginning of it, a coherent vision, or was there, or did they have some reason to be concerned? Not, you didn't have as long a track record then as you have now, and you're kind of making it up on the fly, I guess?
No, well, yeah, that happened, but I had actually had a lot of preparation for it. I'd been trying to put together a project called The Chicken and the Hawk, which was a World War I flying kind of comedy, what MASH was, what MASH became. And when this script, and I never could get it financed or get anybody interested in it, and when this script came to me, this MASH, I didn't like the script very much. But I thought, I can use those techniques, I can use the kind of humor, and the subject is really the same. And I chose to do that. And I put so much, I think I was putting so much attention onto all the background people. I built a very big cast of people who'd never been in films before. Mm-hmm. I went to San Francisco and I got people who were in improvisational theater and stand-up comedians and anybody that would stand on their feet and not faint when they saw a camera. And I spent a lot of time with that, and I think Donald and Elliott kind of felt, well, wait a minute, we're supposed to be the stars of this thing, and they just weren't used to that kind of we've remained very good friends. I did 2 films with Elliott after that, and the only reason I haven't worked with Sutherland is a project hasn't come up.
You didn't get any director's royalties, any movie royalties out of that, just a flat fee, huh?
No, but my son, who was 14 at the time and wrote that song, Suicide is Painless, made $1 million or so. But he didn't cut me in on that either, so I had to go and just get other jobs.
In MASH and in Nashville, and maybe a few others, but MASH and Nashville are 2 that come to mind, you use very large casts, and I'm talking about a dozen or more. In the case of Nashville, probably 20 characters that could be called essential to the movie, and they're rather complex characters, and you're somehow able, in the time span of a movie, to establish depth of character and subtlety of relationships. Were you flying blind as you developed that, or did you have some sort of movie inspiration, some director?
No, but that's part of the process of these films that have many characters like that, and I like that sort of film. I like to see it, and it's a lot of fun to do it. But you've got to remember that the real artists in every film are the actors. I mean, they're the ones that are doing it. I mean, I do all my work, and I'm not diminishing its value. But when I get the film all cast and ready to go, about 95% of my creative work is finished. And these actors are now, they're out there in the arena, and they have to behave, to perform. And they bring in the nuance.
You're probably selling yourself a good deal short, because although that might be the most important thing, you play with time all the time, and various films, parallel experiences happening years apart, and the way that's set up, the way it's cut, the way it's edited.
Sure, I'm as important as they are, but I can't do this alone. I mean, I cannot do these things alone, and they don't come out of my mind. If what I foresee in a film, everything I foresee could say, okay, the script's written, and now it's going to go right to film, it'd be pretty bad. I mean, they would be pretty bad, because I'm dealing with only the limitations of my experience and what I see. And you come in, this person comes in, this person comes in, and they say, oh yeah, I'm the so-and-so, I'm the baker, I'm the this, I'll do this. And so you start in, but they're bringing in the experience of their entire life. And if I can just get them to the point where they can loosen up and not be afraid, that know they're not going to break any rules, they're not going to slow us down, that they can just bring that behavior, then suddenly it stimulates it. It's all going on. I'm just out there. I set the arena up, and I'm just outside watching.
Altman, what, if any, good memories did you take away from your years as a television director? You did some episodes of Bonanza and Combat.
Well, I take a lot of good memories. I mean, that's where I really learned my, that's where I learned my game. I mean, you had to learn every job. You had to know, learn the tools that I use now. And it's just like, it's as important a part of my career or my life as any other time.
Didn't you do an episode of Combat once where instead of just the guts and glory, you had Vic Morrow kind of wandering in a stupor up a road, and he was thinking about what is the meaning of this, and women and children are dying.
He surrendered to a dead German. That was the, yeah, that was, I was fired for that. I made that, I was told not to make that show, and I went ahead and made it, and it won an Emmy or something. It got a lot of acclaim, but I was already locked. They locked me out of the studio. I used to sit in a bar outside of MGM, and Vic Morrow would come out, and he'd go in and talk to the editor, because they wouldn't let me in to talk to the editor, and he'd come out, and we'd have a drink, and he'd say, he's doing this and this and this, and I'd say, well, tell him to take this and put it over there, and then he'd go back in.
Tanner 88 was a rare venture into television, albeit cable television. You called it one of your most creative works. You were proud of the way that thing turned out.
I think that probably the work I did on Tanner, I mean, that work, Gary Trudeau and I mean, that was a real collaboration, and with the actors again. I mean, because we were out doing that at the moment.
Yeah, let me do a quick setup. Yeah. Michael Murphy plays the presidential candidate, and he's showing up in places where the actual candidates are, where Dole is and Robertson and these other guys.
Right. We went and we just mingled. We took our machine and went right in with them, and I think it was very probably landmark. I mean, you'll see. More things will fall out of that. I mean, in a few years, you'll see that kind of thing. It's being done more now, and I just found it very exciting.
Which of the real-life politicians was most receptive and most appreciative of what we were trying to do, and which was the most put off by it?
Well, they're all afraid to be put off. They see a camera, they run for it, all of them. I mean, and especially during that campaign time. And they didn't quite know what we were doing, but they were afraid to miss out on it. Bruce Babbitt was probably the smartest and probably the best of the bunch. He had it in the right place. He was great. Gore, that's the guy from Tennessee.
Mm-hmm. Al Gore.
Albert Gore. He was going to be on it, but then his campaign manager called and says they want to know exactly what our circulation was. How many, and so we didn't respond to that. But we didn't have, we let them use their own agenda. I mean, when I called Babbitt and said he had just dropped out of the campaign, and so I said, do you want to take a walk in Washington and talk to Jack Tanner? And his people said, yeah, sure. And finally they called me. I said, well, what do you want Bruce to talk about? I said, I don't care. And he said, well, I mean, well, what should he talk about? And I said, I don't know. He can talk about how much he loves Jesse Jackson, or how much he loves Ronald Reagan, or how much he hates Margaret Thatcher. I don't care what he says. I don't care what he says. He can talk about his children's shoes. He can talk about anything. And he said, well, you got to tell us something. I said, well, let's talk about the makeup he wears when he does the television stuff. And they kind of laughed at that. And Trudeau had written this to open with that, with Jack Tanner talking about how he hates to put that pancake makeup on. And that's the way they started. And Bruce, they went for 7 minutes, and Bruce was just terrific. So we got a lot of that reality without tricking anybody or doing the kind of things where you, what was it, This Is the Week That Was, that are more comic. I mean, this was the level we were on. And as we got onto it and found out what we were doing, Gary would write those things with these openings, and we had our script that would protect us to get our full time out of it, but basically we'd be out there and the most amazing things happened. and we just let them happen. Because we didn't have to get our guy elected.
You're able to mine new talents more successfully than some other directors are. For example, Cher had never been in a film until you used her in Come Back to the Five and Dime, Jimmy Dean.
When people come to me and they say, gee, how did you get Cher to act? Well, I didn't get Cher to act. I just gave her the space to do it in. And I didn't have any doubts about it. I mean, she'd never been on really in, you know, she went right onto the Broadway stage with that and then into that film. Come Back to the Five and Dime, Jimmy Dean, Jimmy Dean. She was there with Sandy Dennis, with Kathy Bates, with Marta Heflin, Sudie Bond. I mean, and so she was in a really good company. And she performed. Same way with Lily. Same way with Shelley Duvall.
Lily Tomlin, who was very successful as a comedian and on television, wasn't in anything until she was in Nashville.
Well, it's the same thing. Any of those people who have the experience of getting in front of other people and performing. I don't care whether they're singers. I mean, I do this all the time. I'm about to do a new project. I'm going to use Lyle Lovett and Huey Lewis, and they've never acted before as actors. Now, I'm not asking them to go in there and play Camille and die on the play a death scene with a rose in their teeth, but they're playing pretty much the kind of characters that they'll be comfortable playing. But they'll be as good as anybody else, because they'll bring their personality to it. Anybody can do this, you know. It's just if they will.
Anybody can do what?
They can act. If they can get outside, I can't. I cannot do it because I can't. I'm self-conscious. I'm embarrassed. I want to know is. But if you can get past that barrier of your self-consciousness, all the experience that you need is in your head.
Do you suppose that somewhere between the dressing room and this studio, let's say you walked past 15 people, some of them technicians, some secretaries, maybe a producer here and there, a newsman on his way to the studio here at NBC, do you suppose that out of those 15 people, if you were allowed to think about it for half an hour, talk to each of them, there's somebody who could play a very important role in a Robert Altman film and do it well?
Absolutely. And I think there's probably a great musician in those 20 or 30 people, and there's probably a great painter if they had the opportunity to do it. And then if they have the confidence that they can break their shell and let the truth of themselves show, because it's all in everybody's mind. It's in everybody's computer. I mean, we all sit there and say, oh, yeah, I'd do this or I'd do that. And that's all it is.
Get up with Robert Altman tomorrow night. Hope to see you then. And until then, see you later.
Thursday, 74.
Thanks for staying up later. Night 2 with Robert Altman. We just barely touched on Nashville last night, so let's continue. Like MASH, a large and diverse group of actors and actresses, but an additional twist here. You let a lot of them write their own songs that became part of the movie.
Well, the point of the film was we got a lot of heat from the country music establishment in Nashville. They said, this isn't real, these aren't real country songs. But we weren't trying to make good music necessarily. We were trying to give a cross-section of what's really there, what's really here, and there's a lot of those songs that are pretty bad. So I'm not going to sit back there and pass judgment on which is a good song and which isn't. And it helped again with that, giving those people the confidence that they were a whole person. So Keith Carradine wrote It Don't Worry Me and I'm Easy, and I'm Easy won the Academy Award. Karen Black wrote the song she was singing. Ronnie Blakely, who played the sort of the country singer, the Barbara Jean, she was a songwriter. And she wasn't going to play in this originally. We had purchased a song from her, and then it was only at the last minute that we put her in the part. So we used her songs, and then Richard Baskin, who was the musical director on the thing, I didn't much care what songs we used. because it was to represent that this is, it's like wardrobe. I mean, wear something you're comfortable with.
A device that was used throughout the film, there was a reporter, I forget the name of the character, but from the BBC.
Geraldine Chaplin played Opal from the BBC.
And she offered this sort of breathless commentary on America, filled with pieties and always the most approving sort of notions about what was going on, unwittingly, I guess, affirming what the people she was talking about wanted to think about themselves.
Yeah. And she wrote those, most of those. I mean, Geraldine, I'd say, Geraldine lives in Europe, and I'd say, give me, write an essay about, there's one scene where she's walking through a car, one of those places where all the wrecked cars, there are mountains of them. And I remember I said, we'll just put the camera up here and walk through it. And she's talking into her tape recorder, and she says, oh, cars, cars, speak to me. This is like an elephant's graveyard. Is this the... And she did this whole thing about America and the automobiles and et cetera. It's okay with me.
Is your own view of America, or was it at the time that it was made, as bleak as that of the movie?
No, my own view of the world is not bleak at all, but that's what we see, and it is a view. It isn't propaganda. It's just mirrors. It's just a reflection. Again, it's like, this is the way it looks to me. And we actually voiced a lot of opinions that a lot of people had. And some of them were the individual actors who played that plays those parts. There was a time, that was a time when the Vietnam was very unpopular. We had Scott Glenn, who played this soldier, and of course we did that on purpose. He was going through with these medals on, and when he saw the music guy with the long hair and the black T-shirt, Keith Carradine said, how many did you kill today, Sergeant? Well, those kind of attitudes that were in that film really came from those people, and this is what we saw around us all the time. It wasn't me or Joan Tewksbury wrote the screenplay on that. It wasn't our version. It's what we found out there. I mean, we couldn't tell anybody, we couldn't tell who was on the streets, and we shot that in crowds. We went to one of those things, and there was 75 people out there with fezzes on. And there just happened to be some convention. And
were they riding around in those little cars,
well,
those little go-karts?
But everything. So when you see that stuff, you say, that's what's out there, and it's a lot funnier than what I can make up.
Do you find yourself apologizing for exaggeration in films? Maybe people just don't get it. For example, a wedding. I don't believe that you think that middle-class American life is totally devoid of anything redeeming about it. I don't believe you think that every character is some sort of ethical and moral wasteland.
When was the last time you were at a wedding? No, I just think at a wedding all the worst comes out. I thought there were some of those people had redeemed it. It was absolutely fabricated out of my own family and my own family experience. When I was 3 years old, there's a picture of me in the rotogravure section of one of my aunt's weddings, and I had a little satin suit on, and it's the only picture of me I remember, and I see this as I grew up. And when we went to make a wedding, and the circumstances were kind of interesting. There was a journalist. I was shooting 3 women, and it was about 116 degrees down in Palm Springs, and I had an incredible hangover, and I didn't know if I could finish life, let alone the film. And this journalist came rushing up with about 14 layers of Indian clothes on and beads, and she was from Mother Jones, I think, and she said, Mr. Altman, what is your next film going to be? And it was too hot to hit her, and I just couldn't believe this. And I said, well, my next film is going to be a wedding. And she said, is that a book or a script? And I said, no, no. I said, we're going to take this crew and we'll find somebody's going to get married and we're going to go shoot their wedding and, you know, and then give it to them as a film. And we broke for lunch after that, and I went in with a couple of the people that I work with, and I said, you know, that's a pretty good idea. Let's do it.
You know what I was driving at, though. I imagine by this time people know something about Robert Altman, and fewer people who aren't attuned to a Robert Altman film are showing up. But somebody might watch this and say, wait a minute, not every person at a typical wedding has a hyperactive libido. Not every person is this perverse, this, you know, outwardly acceptable, but inwardly so morally empty.
Were you going to ask Scorsese and Coppola the same question? Is every Italian a killer? The films are, none of it's real. And it's like looking at the comic strip page. You look at the comic strip page and you learn to know the degree of cartooning that each artist does. If you're looking at watching Gary Trudeau, you kind of know what it is, the style. If it's Rex Morgan, M.D., you watch that style. And all of these films are cartoons. I mean, they're not, none of this really happens. It's, and it's a matter of the level of the exaggeration that you do. And it's a matter of selecting that. I don't think that I have much choice in it. I mean, I don't really sit there and plan, oh, I want to make a film that's going to look like this. I just giggle and give in and think, I'm going to make a film that looks like, that's my humor, my pain, my sensibility. It's what I see or would like to transmit. I'd like to say, hey, come and look through my distorted window. My view. It's not the truth, it's distorted, but it's what I see.
We continue with Robert Altman. A film of yours I really enjoyed was Buffalo Bill and the Indians, and Paul Newman is cast as Buffalo Bill. Not exactly what myth had made him out to be.
Well, yeah, but Paul was probably closer to the real Buffalo Bill than
how much was research and how much was flights of fancy?
Well, it was all, research was very good. The fancy was that arena we put it in, that camp where everything took place, so we could do it in one place, was apocryphal. We just kind of made that up. But in Newman, Paul went through that saying, I know what I'm doing. I'm playing a movie star. I'm playing some guy that was invented. He kept saying, I'm playing Redford and McQueen and myself. Because we can't do all those things that we do, but we can act like we are. And we really made the analogy to show business, because that's what Buffalo Bill was the first star. He didn't exist outside of theater, the Wild West shows. And you never would have known about him. He started out in the books and the dime novels. Ned Buntline, who Burt Lancaster played, really found this kid and used him to write stories. And then they got Hickok and several of those real guys where they put on the stage. But Bill Cody was a star.
Was it important then, or just a nice little irony, to have a superstar, an icon like Paul Newman play him?
Yes.
So he could appreciate the
I
irony?
wouldn't have done that film without Paul Newman. I mean, I would not have made Buffalo Bill. I don't think it would have worked with an unknown actor. It was part of the fabric, part of the information. There are other films that work the other way. That if you have a real known face or person is in there, it hurts the film. It hurts what I'm trying to show. So it helps a lot, and it depends on the material and what my film, what the painting's going to be, determines on how much baggage do I want the audience to have.
There's a great line in there. I'm probably getting part of it wrong, but Newman turns to the Indian. Was it Sitting Bull that he was talking? He's done his Sitting Bull, and it shows how media savvy he was, or legend-making savvy, if there wasn't really anything like mass media then. And he turns to him and he says, 100 years from now, I'm going to be Buffalo Bill, and you're still going to be the Injun.
That's right. You're going to be the Injun. That's right. That was Alan Rudolph wrote that particular thing, I think. That was, Alan was an assistant on that and wrote the screenplay with us on that. We had a lot of fun.
Throughout the movie, Bill Cody is able to step outside himself, maybe not with much insight, but at least to admire his reflection. And at some level, he had a sense. It wasn't the deepest sense, but on some level, he had a sense of what was going on.
Of who he was, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the way we. But that's what Paul Newman has. I mean, that's Paul Newman is what he's saying. He said, I really know I'm not that detective or that guy or that hero. I really know I'm not that, but I'm going to maintain that thing. I mean, Paul was very, very, very smart in that, and it's a great performance, I think. The film came out at a very unfortunate time. It was the summer, we opened on July 4th, 1976, which was the Bicentennial. It happened to be the year that Richard Nixon was in the news a lot. He'd been thoroughly disgraced and left office. And
didn't he leave in '74?
Yeah, but it had just happened. It was in '75, actually, or was it '74?
He left in '74. Yeah.
Well, we were shooting this, but when this came out, the nation on its bicentennial year was licking its wounds because most of the people out there had voted for Richard Nixon. So there was a lot of humility and a lot of pouting going on. The only big major celebration in the country were the tall ships in New York, and those came from foreign countries. So most of America was out having picnics. They weren't out in big spreads shooting off things and whooping it up and laughing at themselves. They were kind of licking their wounds. And then we come out with this big splash on what a fake Buffalo Bill was.
Not a good time for icon smashing.
No, and it didn't work at all. But I think it's a wonderful film. I mean, I love that film.
Particularly enjoy to take a familiar sort of film form and turn it on its ear, or is that again coincidence? It sort of suggests itself, and then you go in your own direction.
Well, a lot of times it's a combination of those things. I don't do it. I don't say, oh, I'll make a film for that reason. But a lot of times a film will be suggested, or I'll start to go into an area and that has some precedence that's been set. And I'll think, well, it doesn't have to be that way. I don't think it's that way. And so I'll go the other way. I'll go to because all the time I think I'm trying to give you hints in every film that this is just a film. This isn't real. This is just an illusion. And so it's fun for me to use the medium that I'm in to open it up and let you look at it at the same time. And I think that's probably I've been called a genre breaker and those kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
McCabe and Mrs. Miller is one example. It's set in the Northwest, it's set in the 1800s. It's a Western, but it ain't your typical Western.
Yeah, but we did, that's what those Western towns looked at. And I'm probably as far off of the actual truth in that as John Wayne was. But we got into, so what do we use for research? Well, photographs. Photographs, because we have photographs that were taken at that time, and that tells us that guy, that's the truth. They wore those kind of hats. Well, it just simply isn't true. A glass photographic plate costs around $2. So there's the guy working in his swing, and some guy comes in town, some fool comes in wearing some silly hat, and he says, Jesus, I better get a picture of that. I've never seen that before. So he takes the picture of the guy with the big hat. We look in the history books, that's the picture we see. All those guys wore big hats. Well, this was one guy with a big hat, and that's why I had his picture taken. Everybody else was wearing derbies and little European hats, and we just took it from that position. Same with accents. I mean, if they all talked like they were from Texas, I mean, it wasn't real. These people had Irish accents, they had Italian accents, German, Dutch, English, and we're all first generation.
I remember reading a review of McCabe and Mrs. Miller, which, for those who haven't seen it, Julie Christie is the frontier prostitute, and Warren Beatty is this freewheeling gambler sort of fellow. But this review said something that was very telling, and it's just what you've laid out here. It's the West, that portion of the West, as we imagine it to be, which was important. Because what do we have to conjure up some sort of imaginary notion of the West except those pictures, the stories we've read? And so it was visually resonant in that way because that's how it was supposed to be, a little gray. It couldn't be vibrantly colorful. It's supposed to kind of have a fuzz around it.
Yeah, I think that color is well, film is tough to work with in itself. You can't meet 5 people and say, I like black and white better. But, you know, you've never seen anything in black and white. I mean, nobody has seen anything in black and white except a picture, nothing living. And it helps distance it. It helps make it... one of the biggest problems is trying to disguise what I'm showing you. If I want to rather have the big scene played on the back of the actor's head rather than flat on into the screen. So that you, the audience, can sit there and use your own imagination and your own experience as to what's happening. And that's a big part of this. Film is so specific. Radio, you know, only had about 6 years of it because television came along and destroyed it. But radio drama was wonderful because when you'd hear that door squeak, I mean, everybody envisioned their own door. And so I think we still have the obligation as artists I'm trying to get the audience, each individual in the audience, to use his own information, his own experiences, his own pain, the things he laughs at, the things he's afraid to laugh at, come out just spontaneously from a stimulus that I've shown them.
Robert Altman's latest film, Vincent and Theo, about the relationship between the painter Vincent Van Gogh and his brother Theo, who tried to help him through tough times, comes out the first week in November. We appreciate the 2 nights that Robert spent with us. Thanks. It was a great pleasure. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
And we're gone. See you later.
Who is that behind the shower curtain? He's got a knife. It's Psycho Anthony Perkins tomorrow on Later.